All right, let me give you an overview of the schedule for the week first before we collect those. Today we're going to watch a documentary on the Germanic tribes, also known as the barbarians. What we're trying to do is transition from one historical context to the next, and it's to follow the western portion of the Roman Empire, and that leads into a dark age, right? Rome was great and civilized, and then it reverts. This is the second dark age that we refer to. It's a dark age that precedes the medieval times. Who was dominating these Dark Age-esque time period? That would be what we call Germanic tribes or barbarians. So we're going to try to familiarize ourselves with the barbarians today and tomorrow. You do have a take-home quiz today. It's posted on the website. It does say 4th hour. It's the bottom of the left-hand column with the links underneath Europe. Make sure you click on the correct one where it says 4th hour. Hopefully that'll be finished by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. It's 20 questions. You should be able to complete it fairly quickly if you're paying attention to our notes on Rome and Greece over the past week. Sound good? You do have a race quiz tomorrow as well, so I want to make sure that you're prepared for that. Tuesday, tomorrow in class we'll take notes on the migrating tribes of Europe. The barbarians may watch more of the documentary. Wednesday, we'll complete a jigsaw, get more specifics about some of these barbarians. And then Thursday, Friday, we're going to work on a writing assignment. It used to be 5 paragraphs. I don't want to grade, that many essays at the end of the semester. So last year I narrowed it down to 2 paragraphs. I may narrow it down to 1 this time around, okay? So simplify it. We'll work on it on Thursday, maybe proofread a little bit on Friday. You still have to do a little bit of research on your own there, but it's quite a bit easier than what it used to be. And then on Friday, you may have an opportunity to read from Race. Sound good? But that writing assignment will be due on Monday of next week. Your assignments are posted up there on the board if you want to take note of those. Let's go ahead and pass our folder dashboards. All right. I will read through these twice. First time, familiarize yourself with it. Second time, we will vote. Sound good? So the word is hippodrome. Hippodrome, somewhere, someone goes to a place. Hippodrome is a village in the Himalayas. Hippodrome's a large gathering place for a group of people for celebrations, such as birthdays. Has stained glass windows, happy colors. Hippodrome is a hippo, but in a tree. Hippodrome is a place in Europe where you sit, and that's it. Hippodrome is something they use to take out your organs. Hippodrome is a stadium-like structure found in the Roman Empire, used for chariot races. Hippodrome is the resting place of an aquatic animal. Hippodrome is a name given to a Roman slave who served for the emperor. Hippodrome is a large house built from mud and volcanic ash. Hippodrome is an Eastern European culture located in Moldova. Hippodrome is a Roman name for a big body of water. All right, heads down. You get a vote for one. You cannot vote for your own. Hippodrome, somewhere, someone goes to a place. Hippodrome is a village in the Himalayas. Hippodrome is a large gathering place for a group of people for celebrations such as birthdays, and it has stained glass windows. Hippodrome is a hippo, but in a tree. Hippodrome is a place in Europe where you sit, and that's it. Hippodrome is something they use to take out organs. Hippodrome is a stadium-like structure found in the Roman Empire, used for chariot races. Hippodrome is a is the resting place for an aquatic animal. Hippodrome is a name given to a Roman slave who served the emperor. Hippodrome is a large house built from mud and volcanic ash. Hippodrome is an Eastern European culture located in Moldova. Hippodrome's a Roman name for a big body of water. All right. Ooh, we had a tie. Is this you, Mason? A village in the Himalayas?
No.
Who did that one? Miss Rebecca. You can feel good about yourself. You got one vote for that. Our winners, we had a tie. Ms. Lemkuhl, you can feel good about yourself. A name given to a Roman slave who served the emperor. 2 votes there. Large house built from mud and volcanic ash. Mr. Ulrich, feel good about yourself as well. We did have 6 people vote for the correct answer. Didn't think this one was going to be as challenging as the others. We got 6 people that can feel good about yourself. I didn't write down your names. But you can write down the definition in anticipation of Bellwork quiz question later on in the week. It's a stadium-like structure found in the Roman Empire used for chariot races. I believe Mr. King actually wrote down the right answer as well, so props to you. Excellent job there. You guys ever, I think there's a movie called Ben-Hur. I'm not sure if it's came out yet. You guys heard of Ben-Hur? Ben-Hur? No? Take note. Where next time you go to the movies, maybe there'll be a trailer for Ben-Hur, because I think it's supposed to come out sometime soon or within the next year. It's a recreation of a film back in like 1959, 1960, and it's set during the Roman Empire. It's got some interesting stuff inside. So, we talked about the Jewish culture in our study on race, and it follows a Jewish character and his progression from really a life of inferiority to a life of supremacy and up and down. Okay, Ben-Hur. Inside the film, though, it's got a depiction of a hippodrome and a chariot race. In the original 1959 movie, it was pretty intense. One of the most intense scenes that they had in the movie at the time, because the guy, he got ran over by one of the chariots, right? And it was... there were some stories, background information. I was told that he died. You have to look into that, but they actually kept the footage in there. That's what I was told. I could be wrong there in that situation, but it was some pretty intense stuff with the chariot race scene. So it was pretty cool, though, for being made in 1959. So you can look that up on YouTube on your own if you want. But the purpose of our Bellwork, having it in here, again, the Hippodrome's kind of like a Colosseum-esque type of structure, and again, it's about cultural diffusion, taking the Roman ideas and diffusing them outward, spreading them throughout the Roman Empire and much of the Mediterranean and Europe. Okay? All right, let's transition to our word of the day today. Sound good? We've gone through a lot of our rules. We're just going to take the last couple weeks and just review some of the rules that we've had with our word of the day. So today we're going to do a compound sentence. Compound sentence. You have to have 2 independent clauses joined together by a comma and a conjunction. Conjunctions that we are going to use are and, or but. Make sure again that you have a comma in front of your conjunction, just before your conjunction, and, or but. Word of the day today is cacophony. It's got harsh sounds as the description up there. I want you to write chaos. C-H-A-O-S as our first synonym, chaos. A cacophony of coughing. A cacophony isn't noise alone, it's disturbing noise, such as when people shout all at once. The last sentence, I like this one. An unpleasant cacophony of sound was produced as the orchestra tuned their instruments, but once they began to play together, the sounds became euphonious. Let's write down euphonious as our first antonym. First antonym, euphonious, E-U-P-H-O-N-I-O-U-S. E-U-P-H-O-N-I-O-U-S. Euphonious. Part of speech. Let's start with that. Ms. Lemkuhl, cacophony. A cacophony of... You would guess that. A lot of people assume that. It's a tough one. It's not a verb. It is a noun. Yeah. It is a thing. A cacophony. So, chaos. What else do we have for synonyms? Yes?
Wild.
Wild. Let's put it in a noun. So, wilderness. Right? Wilderness. Noun form. Maybe a bit of a stretch. We got one more? kind of a sound does a car make when it comes to a halt? Screech. Screech. Antonyms, I think of words that begin with an M. You know, the euphonious sentence reflects upon an orchestra with, music. And there's a component in music. It begins with an M, goes up and down. A melody. Melody. M-E-L-O-D-Y. Melody. Yes, sir? Harmony would work, yeah, as well if you need a fourth one. All right. Sentence context today was in the news again this weekend. Something we looked at last fall. It's what we wrote our first research paper on. Anybody remember what that was? Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There are 3 Palestinian territories. Anybody remember the 3 Palestinian territories? Gaza Strip's one. What were the other 2? Yeah? Golan Heights. And another one? I believe the Golan Heights has just recently been reacquired by the Israelis, or at least they are identifying themselves as having sovereignty over Golan Heights now, more recently. And the other one is called the West Bank, which includes Jerusalem. You guys remember that? West Bank. So the conflict this past weekend was centered around the Gaza Strip. There's an organization there that represents the Palestinians. The United States identifies them as a terrorist organization. Does anybody know what that group would be? Begins with an H. Hamas. Hamas. And I think it initiated, there was 2 deaths, Palestinian side towards, or Gaza Strip side towards the Israelis. 2 Israeli officers, I think, died. The Israelis countered, and there were 2 Palestinians that died, and then the Palestinians countered back, and they started launching missiles into Israel. There's a lot of destruction, but I don't think there was much death there. Israel countered back again, shooting more advanced missiles into the Gaza Strip, and then there were a number of deaths on the Palestinian side again, right, in this particular case. So this conflict between the Gaza Strip, Palestinians and the Israelis, Hamas and the Israelis, not going away. Okay, seems like it's an important week this week as well for the Palestinians and Israelis. The Palestinians, most of them are followers of Islam. Again, not all of them. You don't have to follow Islam if you are a Palestinian, but the majority are. And this is the beginning of the month in which they fast from sun up to sundown. Anybody remember that is? Not Rosh Hashanah. That's Jewish holiday, yeah? Yom Kippur, right? Today's the beginning of Yom Kippur. I'm sorry, it's not Yom Kippur. That's again a Jewish. Yom Kippur is the last of the high holy days, yes?
So can they?
It's Ramadan, before we get too distracted. All right, so that's a big one. There's another type of entertainment event going on with the Israelis, and the Hamas is like countered, saying that they're going to, they've threatened to attack or something with this entertainment stuff. I'm not sure what that is all about. Yes?
So, like, if they can't eat from sun up to sundown, can they wake up at like 3 in the morning and have like a burger?
Yeah, exactly. But once the sun comes up, and that means, no eating, and a lot of times it means no water, right? Think about it though. The temperature is pretty warm now, right? It's getting warmer than what it was. No water throughout the entirety of the day. It's going to be tough. It'll be a challenge for those individuals. It is quite the sacrifice in that case. All right, that's our sentence context. Sound good? So Gaza, compound sentence, cacophony. Shouldn't be too much of a stretch there. Go ahead and share your sentence, person in front of person behind you.
They're gonna be out there Friday and start.
That's not what I wanted.
What do you have?
Yeah, roast. Make fun of me.
All right, let's share. Ms. Noe.
The conflict in Israel is a cacophony, but there is still some light at the end of the tunnel.
Throwing in, what would we call that? A light at the end of the tunnel. That's a what? No. I can't remember the literary term that we would throw that in there. Maybe I have to look that up, literary term for that. All right, good stuff. Let's go to the classroom website. Click directly on Global Cultures. Scroll down to where it says discussion boards, right? Or it says group discussion. Take the code for 4th hour. Click on discussion, group discussion length, and then you can go to the, everybody remember the soapbox place? This is where we'll have our questions for today. There is a section of the document, and maybe get a little uncomfortable. The Romans, the barbarians, they have different norms, right? They don't sometimes wear clothes like we wear clothes. So I'm going to probably eliminate the imagery, but I'm going to continue to let the sound of the documentary play in the background for it's a period of about a minute or so, and then we'll get back to the visual imagery. Yeah? Can you get a drink? No, I'm sorry. May take care of that before class. All right, let's get to our documentary. I'll get some questions posted here in just a second. Oh, I do want to give you a heads up. It is a little bit dated, but the reason why I like it so much, it does a pretty good job of identifying cultural characteristics of the barbarians. It is a little bit of dry humor here, right? A lot of dry humor. It's supposed to be humorous, and sometimes not. But then again, because it's not humorous, it makes it humorous somewhat as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Definitely not doing what I wanted to do. Try again.
Rude, they're crude, and have a bad attitude. Vandals, Visigoths, Franks, and Huns. Hold the gate and hide the booty. The barbarians are coming.
They sure know how to throw a party. And the lighting, they were so good at this. Everyone looked good. Well, times are great in ancient Rome. The empire is as big as it's ever going to get. Roman civilization is unmatched on the planet except for maybe China, but nobody knows where China is anyways, except for them. Now, the only possible threat to Rome are the barbarians. They're just a scrubby bunch of party poopers living on the outside fringes of the empire, hardly a worthy opponent for the mighty Roman army. Still, raids across the border are becoming more and more frequent, and the army can't be everywhere at once. Oh, well, I'm sure the army's up to the task, and heck, no one else seems to be worrying. I should be getting back to the party. Like they say, when in Rome. Hey, it's a nice toga.
In
August of 378 AD, on a plain near the city of Adrianople in Thrace, now northwestern Turkey, the Roman army, under the personal command of Valens, emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, was defeated and destroyed by an army of barbarian Goths. The emperor himself was slain. On that day in August, on that blistering field, the world turned. Civilization met its antithesis, and the destroyer won. Adrianople marked the beginning of the end for the Roman Empire. The army of Rome was defeated within the empire's boundaries. From that point on, barbarian kingdoms inside the empire were tolerated. Imperial influence fragmented, text base splintered. The barbarians had arrived, and there would be no turning them back. How had they managed to defeat the mightiest military force history had ever seen? Who were these barbarians?
Hey, who are you calling a barbarian?
Oh, sorry. In the ancient world, barbarian meant foreigner or alien. It applied to someone who spoke neither Greek nor Latin. The Greeks used barbarous as an insult mimicking a stranger's speech, which sounded to them like bar 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 of sheep.
Oh, Mr. Barbarian, man, oh, nasty for a moment.
Centuries later, the Romans expanded the definition of barbarian to include anyone living outside the boundaries of the empire. And they also thought they sounded like sheep. Barbarians were said to be uncivilized. We take that to mean that they had crude ways, but the root of civilized is civil, which means lives in towns. Romans lived in towns complete with running water, plumbing, and planned streets. Barbarians were declared uncivil because they lived in villages. In a sense, it all boils down to indoor plumbing. The Romans had it, barbarians didn't. But for the Romans, the word barbarian had other, more frightening connotations. Primitive, wild, savage, barbaric. Makes you wonder what went on in those villages, doesn't it?
The problem with what we know about the barbarians is everything comes from the Roman point of view. But as a group, there's a big menace to the animals outside ravaging around trying to get in, and they have to be destroyed.
What were the barbarians really like? Roman historian Tacitus provided the first accounts of the barbarian Germans. He presented the barbarians as a noble savage, living a simple, pure lifestyle as contrasted with the Roman decadence of the time.
According to Tacitus, if you read the Germania, it is a classic statement around 100 AD, you would believe that the Germans have a more pure and noble attitude about sex because they abstain from it as a sign of their discipline and willpower, which, by contrast, Tacitus will say, the Romans are incapable of doing, and therefore the Romans are promiscuous and the Germans are pure and unpolluted and simple. And in that simplicity comes their strength.
The image of the simple, noble warrior was the basis for the Teutonic myths we find today in Wagner's operas and in comic book heroes like Conan the Barbarian.
Creatures from the id. The image of the barbarian is very attractive. It's like dinosaurs. Little kids like dinosaurs, big kids like barbarians. Especially Arnold Schwarzenegger type barbarians. Scantily clad, both males and females. Now, how dumb could that be? Barbarians are thought to come from the northern climates, but yet in Hollywood, they wear virtually nothing. Here's a stereotype that doesn't make any sense at all. But no one argues with Arnold Schwarzenegger, so it goes on.
It's difficult to generalize about barbarians. Keep in mind, the descendants of these tribes would eventually populate such diverse countries as England, Spain, and Turkey. And remember, the barbarian invasions occurred over centuries. What was true in one era may be entirely different in the next. And finally, we have to take what we do know about them with a grain of salt. After all, our information is coming from the Romans, who definitely had an axe to grind. It's tough to be objective about somebody who's looting your living room. We know that the Germanic barbarians lived in tribes. They were divided into three basic classes: warriors, priests, and peasants. And they practiced slavery. The northern barbarian was a big man. His diet was heavy and rich in protein. He ate beef, pork, fish, venison, and he liked his beer. 24-hour drinking bouts were an accepted and common method of male bonding. Hair, for the most part, was grown long and tied up in knots. Many warriors dyed it red so as to be frightening to the enemy. The early barbarian warriors wore little armor. He either made his own weapons, traded for them, or stole them from the enemy. On the battlefield, the barbarians favored a wedge-like formation with the leader at the front. Charging the army, the warriors sounded the battle song, holding their shields in front of their faces so that the resonance magnified the volume. Tacitus, the historian, wrote that the sound began as a dull murmur and swelled with the heat of battle until it resembled the din of waves crashing against rocks. The barbarian warrior believed a man's head contained his life force, which might explain why he was so eager to cut them off. Heads were symbols of victory. Warriors returned proudly to their villages with the heads of their vanquished foes, dangling them from their spears or tied to their horses' harness. In the 1st century BC, Julius Caesar conquered the territory of Gaul, greatly expanding the Roman Empire on the east and north of the Danube River. Gaul was inhabited by Gaelic and Celtic barbarian tribes who, like their German neighbors to the east, were a fierce, hardy people, which is understandable considering they had to go to the bathroom outside in the wintertime. The Gauls and the Celts were perhaps not entirely unhappy with the idea of being conquered. History teaches us that a defeated nation may often prosper after a war. The Gaelic tribes may not have had Toyotas and transistor radios to sell to the Romans, but they had livestock and horses, jewelry, and weapons. Meanwhile, across the Rhine, outside the boundary of the empire, in the land known to the Romans as the Barbaricum, barbarian Germans watched in envy as the Gauls and the Celts became Romanized and got rich in the process. The Germans sent raiding parties across the Rhine to relieve the Gauls and the Celts of their newfound wealth. The Gauls and the Celts, far less warlike since settling into their new status as suburban Romans, dialed 911 for the Roman army. The Roman army was at the top of its game. Legions were well trained and disciplined. Their tactics and weaponry were far superior to anything the barbarians could muster. And after all, they just defeated one bunch of barbarians, the Celtic tribes. How much tougher could these German barbarians be? Assessing the situation, the Romans decided the most efficient way to curtail the border raids would be to invade across the Rhine and conquer the Germans in one quick campaign. The German barbarians were to prove a lot tougher than the Gaelic and Celtic barbarians. For one thing, they lived in more remote climes, further from the influence and trade routes of the empire. Closer to nature, they farmed or hunted for subsistence. Life was a constant battle with wild animals and other tribes. The Romans found out quickly that the Germans made the Celts look like conscientious objectors. In 9 AD, in the Teutoburger Forest, east of the Rhine, 3 legions of Romans were ambushed by barbarian German tribes. Deep in the forest, they were set upon by a screaming horde. Spears were hurled from the thickets. The startled Romans fell back in disarray. Before they could form a battle line, the Germans were on them.
The Germans don't have tactics. They line up and they charge. And the charge is terrible. The charge is actually terrifying.
In the dark, horrible confusion of the Teutoburger Forest, 3 Roman legions were massacred. The general Varus fell on his sword. When Roman Emperor Augustus heard the news, he was said to have beat the walls of his palace, crying out for his lost legions. So much for the conquest of Germany. But the Romans would soon return to the woods looking for revenge.
Did you ever wonder who they was? You know, they. Like, they said it may rain on Friday, or they said it couldn't be done. The barbarians were the original they of history. If you lived within the borders of the Roman Empire, you were a we. You were one of us. Those on the outside, the uncivilized, the barbarians, they were theys. Then, of course, when a group of barbarians came and settled in the empire, they became us, and some new group of barbarians would be they for a while. Well, one of the main differences between Romans and barbarians, aside from plumbing, was that the Romans ate cheese and drank wine, while the barbarians drank beer with coarse bread. Sounds like the difference between a fern bar and a sports bar, doesn't it? Well, no wonder they hated each other.
Following the slaughter in the forest, the Roman general Tiberius rushed with his army to the border. But after reviewing the situation, Tiberius decided there was no future in hunting down bloodthirsty barbarians in the woods. Instead, he went back to Rome, became emperor, and sent his nephew, Germanicus, to deal with the messy business of revenge. Germanicus, who evidently missed the shortcut, arrived at the border 5 years later, and even then needed to convince his nervous legions that the barbarians were not the super warriors they were cracked up to be.
The Germans wear neither breastplate nor helmet. Their shields are not even strengthened with metal or hide, but are made of wicker work or thin, painted wood. They carry only spears, and many of these are simply fire-hardened sticks. Their bodies, while grim enough to behold, are powerful only for a short-lived onset and lack the stamina to bear a wound. Germanicus, 14 AD.
The pep talk must have worked because the Romans invaded the Barbaricum and managed to hunt down and kill a large number of Germans. But when the Roman army finally withdrew, the German tribes remained essentially unconquered. The Germans judged a man by his courage in battle. Warriors fought as much for respect of their kinsmen as to defeat the enemy. The barbarian leader led by example rather than authority of rank. He could never allow himself to be surpassed in courage by his followers. That meant he had to lead every attack. Tribe leaders had the life expectancy of a donut at a police station. Cowardice was not tolerated in the barbarian tribe. The most common weapon to the Germanic barbarian was a simple wooden stick hardened in fire to make a spear. Beyond this, the best source of weaponry was dead Roman soldiers. In some cases, the Romans destroyed their weapons rather than have them fall into barbarian hands. Roman law made it a crime to sell weapons to barbarians. But who ever heard of a law-abiding barbarian? On paper, the Romans and barbarians were hopelessly mismatched. The Roman soldier was well trained, his barbarian counterpart was barely housebroken. Romans fought in formation, while the barbarians most resembled an angry mob. The Romans wore a helmet and body armor and carried spears or swords of forged metal. The barbarian wore a beard and carried a sharp stick.
You come in peace with spears. We're attacked.
Fighting with only a spear presented another problem. Once you've thrown it, what do you do then? The battlefield after a victory was a treasure trove of weaponry. As contact with the Roman army became more frequent, the barbarians were able to arm themselves with more effective Roman weapons. They were learning also that guerrilla tactics of terror and ambush were more effective against the legions than the emotional fury of a direct attack against a well-trained phalanx. As the Roman army became less able to deal with the barbarian Germans, politicians took over and began to buy them off.
Tribal chieftains were invited to settle in Gaelic Roman towns east of the Rhine. Some went along, others did not.
Buying barbarians off is only ever going to work if you have military dominance. And if you have military dominance, then why are you going to buy them off? And once you've given them the money, what's to stop them having the money and the plunder?
Sometimes troublesome barbarian tribes were dealt with in more creative ways.
They would recruit the leaders into the Roman army and leave the people leaderless, then transfer the leaders 2,000 miles away. That was the best method. It was really painless. Recruit them on the Rhine and send them to Egypt.
There was no loyalty between barbarian tribes. Rome exploited this by hiring one tribe to fight against another.
We mustn't think just that barbarians fight against Romans. Barbarians fight barbarians as well, and they kill each other just as happily as they'll kill Romans.
Prisoners captured in battle between tribes were sold as slaves to Rome. The Roman appetite for slaves was insatiable.
People have value as slaves, ultimately as concubines, ultimately for ransom. If you seize an extremely important individual, maybe even an administrator within the Roman Empire, and you don't immediately kill him, you might be able to work a ransom with the provincial governor to get him back.
If you want to buy a slave, you're better off doing it on the frontier because they're cheaper. And we have some wonderful letters from Symmachus, who's a Roman aristocrat from the end of the 4th century, writing to one of his friends on the Rhine and saying, will you buy me some slaves? Because they're cheaper on the Rhine than they are here in Rome.
A two-tiered system evolved in the barbarian world in which chieftains and their followers became professional warriors, while weaker men, women, and slaves were left to farming. A successful chieftain rewarded his warriors with the spoils of war: horses, cattle, slaves, weapons, and food. In this way, wealth became concentrated among a warrior elite and was not shared with the whole tribe. Between the 1st and the 3rd centuries, barbarian warriors evolved from primitives with sharp sticks into professional warriors, complete with horse, armor, and metal weapons. A new weapon was developed for the mounted warrior. It was a two-edged slashing sword, a spatha, ideal for fighting from horseback. Barbarians were no longer near-naked savages. By the middle of the 3rd century AD, the barbarian population living on both sides of the Danube had greatly increased. While some tribes traded with the empire, others remained a problem. Barbarian warlords, grown wealthy with the trading profits or the spoils of raids, became bolder as their political power increased. Many of these warlords were content to settle comfortably inside the empire and live the good life. But for every barbarian tribe making peace with the empire, a new, even more aggressive one appeared at the border. The Romans could have used a program to keep track of the barbarians that were threatening to overrun their empire. In the northwest, there were the Celts and the Picts. To the east of them were the Celts and the Teutons. To the west were a group of particularly argumentative tribes called the Franks. To the north, beyond the Danube, were the various Germanic tribes: Vandals, Langobards, Alemanni, Marcomannis, etc. To the east and northeast were the Gothic races, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths.
Alright, we're going to stop there. And finish up with our 3 questions today, okay?